There's a photograph from 2009. You've probably never seen it. A man stands alone in a hospital corridor, his hand pressed against sterile white walls, his body bent as if gravity itself had turned against him. That man was Liam Neeson. And in the room behind him, the light of his entire world was about to go dark forever. They say some men are born to suffer beautifully, to carry tragedy like a crown they never asked for. At 73, the man whose voice could command armies on screen has spent the last 15 years whispering to ghosts. But before we descend into the shadow that swallowed him whole, ask yourself this: how much can one soul endure before it simply stops trying? June 7, 1952, Ballymena, Northern Ireland. A town where your religion determined whether doors opened or slammed in your face. The house at the end of the street had walls so thin you could hear prayers through them. Inside lived the Neeson family, working poor, Irish Catholic, struggling to exist in a world designed to forget them. But here's what nobody talks about. Young Liam wasn't just quiet, he was disappearing. His Aunt Molly noticed it first. The way he'd shrink into corners, the way his words came out like apologies. "That boy," she'd whisper, "he's learning to become invisible." Why does a child choose silence? His father had the answer: violence. At 9 years old, Liam was sent to a boxing club that smelled of desperation and broken teeth. The logic was simple and cruel. If the world was going to hit you, you'd better learn to hit back. By 14, he was a youth boxing champion. 3 consecutive years. Trophy after trophy lined a windowsill in a house that could barely afford bread. But championships don't heal what's broken inside. Then came the fight that changed everything, or did it end everything? One moment, fluorescent lights, the roar of a bloodthirsty crowd, 2 boys circling each other like wounded animals. The next, darkness. Not the darkness of closing your eyes. The darkness of ceasing to exist. A fist connected with his temple. His brain, he would later describe, just went. The world didn't fade, it erased itself. Sound collapsed into a metallic scream. Reality fractured into pieces that would never quite fit together again. When he woke, something fundamental had broken. Not in his body, in his trust of consciousness itself. He walked away from boxing that night. Forever. No explanation. No goodbye. But the question that haunts this story: what else did he leave in that ring? His confidence, his voice, his belief that the world could be anything other than painful. His father's face said everything. Pride curdled into disappointment. His mother's prayers grew louder, more desperate. And young Liam learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Sometimes surviving means becoming someone else entirely. The rain on their tin roof became his only constant companion. A rhythm that sang of poverty and inevitability. "You never forget that sound," he'd say decades later, his voice carrying a weight that no Oscar could measure. Picture a room barely larger than a closet. Belfast, 1970s. A single bulb hangs from a wire like a suicide note. Inside, a 17-year-old boy sleeps in his coat because heating costs money he doesn't have. His hands are bleeding from hauling freight. His back screams from loading ships. His stomach has learned to stop asking for food. This is where Liam Neeson learned what hunger really means. Not just physical hunger, though there was plenty of that. The kind where you count pennies before buying bread, then decide bread is a luxury you can't afford. But something darker. A hunger of the soul. "I was close to giving up," he'd confess years later. "I was 30, broke, and furious at myself for still believing." University was a fantasy that starvation interrupted. He'd enrolled at St. Mary's College, dreaming of becoming a teacher. But dreams require calories, and calories require money. And money was something that existed only in other people's pockets. So he drove lorries through ice storms, built walls with hands that would one day hold golden globes, loaded cargo onto ships that sailed toward destinations he'd never see. Every night, the same ritual. Returning to that coffin-sized room, staring at a cracked mirror, asking the stranger in the reflection, "Why are you still here?" The buses would rattle past his window, carrying people who seemed to know where they were going. His life wasn't moving, it was drowning in slow motion. But fate has a twisted sense of timing. A theater in Belfast needed a janitor. That's all, someone to sweep sawdust and empty ashtrays. Liam took the job because survival meant saying yes to everything. But something strange happened while he was pushing that broom across an empty stage. The wood beneath his feet seemed to whisper something back. Within weeks, the janitor was given 2 lines in a play, just 2 sentences. Nothing lines, really. But when he spoke them, something shifted in the universe. I finally felt heard, he'd remember. But what he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that he'd been screaming silently for 24 years. Still, poverty stalked him like a predator. His shoes fell apart. His coat reeked of rain and delusion. He walked miles to rehearsals because bus fare meant choosing between transportation and eating. Dublin, London, more cramped flats, more strangers' floors, more nights wondering if hope was just another word for stupidity. Every audition was a prayer thrown into a void that rarely answered. But here's the mystery. Why did he keep going? What was he running toward, or fleeing from? By the early 1980s, Liam Neeson had become a ghost haunting the edges of theater and film. Excalibur, The Mission, The Bounty, films that should have launched careers, but instead left him stranded in purgatory. Casting directors saw something unsettling in his face. Too intense, they'd write in their notes. Eyes too sad for commercial appeal. He collected rejection letters like other men collected scars. Sometimes, he admitted, the only thing that kept me going was knowing I had nothing to return to. Then 1993 arrived with Schindler's List, and everything changed. Or did it? Steven Spielberg cast him as Oskar Schindler, the industrialist, who saved over 1,000 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. The role demanded he inhabit a man drowning in guilt, carrying the weight of souls he couldn't save. For 110 days, Liam Neeson wasn't acting. He was possessed. In Krakow, after filming the liquidation of the ghetto, one of cinema's most harrowing sequences, he sat alone in his hotel room. No lights, no sound, just darkness and a chain of cigarettes burning down to his fingers. It took months to feel like myself again, he'd confess. But was that true, or had he left part of himself in that darkness, never to return? 7 Oscars, global acclaim, his face everywhere, and yet fame doesn't heal you. It just makes your silence louder. Think about that. The whole world is finally watching, and all it does is amplify the emptiness inside. The films kept coming. Michael Collins, Les Miserables, Gangs of New York, critical darlings that struggled at the box office. Then something strange. Between 2004 and 2008, he poured nearly $2 million of his own money into independent films nobody wanted to see. I believed in stories that didn't sell, he said with that haunted smile. Why financially destroy yourself for art nobody asked for? Perhaps because poverty had taught him that money was always temporary, that the only currency that mattered was meaning. Then at 56, an age when most actors fade, came Taken, a throwaway action film shot in Paris. Studios predicted failure. Instead, $223 million worldwide. The man who'd once swept theater floors became an icon of vengeance and survival. But listen carefully to what he said. It was a strange kind of resurrection. But resurrection has its weight. What did he mean by that? What weight was he carrying? The sequels came. Taken 2, non-stop, run all night, 16-hour days, continental shoots, his body beginning to betray him. I'm not 25 anymore, he joked. But they keep handing me guns. In his trailer After Midnight, too exhausted to remove the fake blood, he'd stare at his reflection and see a stranger wearing his face. Work was oxygen, he confessed. I didn't know how to stop breathing. But that's not quite true, is it? He wasn't addicted to work. He was running from stillness, because stillness meant remembering, and remembering meant facing what he'd lost. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to talk about the women who tried to save him. The set of Excalibur. A 29-year-old nobody meets Helen Mirren, already a goddess at 36. She was everything he wasn't: confident, refined, fearless. And yet she saw him, not the struggling actor, but the frightened boy from Ballymena, who'd learned to apologize for existing. For 4 years they built a private universe. A cluttered London flat, filled with scripts and cheap wine and laughter that echoed off walls that had forgotten joy. "You belong in this world, Liam," she told him. "You just don't believe it yet." And for a moment, one brief shimmering moment, he did. But fame is a jealous lover. As his star began to rise, rumors circulated. He was riding her coattails, using her name to open doors. The whispers cut deeper than any rejection letter. Pride built walls where love had built bridges. Silence grew where conversation once lived. One winter night, she packed her bags. The taxi pulled away, her hand raised in farewell behind fog glass. "She was the first person who made me feel enough," he'd say years later, "and the first to prove I wasn't." 4 years of winter followed. Loneliness became his address. Then 1988, Julia Roberts, 20 years old, all sunlight and possibility. He was 36, still learning to trust happiness. The 16-year gap between them felt like crossing different lifetimes. She called him old soul. He smiled because it was true. He'd lived too many winters in too few years. Their relationship was brief, tender, doomed by the mathematics of fame. Her star was rising. His was still searching for altitude. "You'll be wonderful," he told her, as she left for another city, another film, another life. "You already were," she replied. Brief summers, he'd learn, leave the deepest marks. But the greatest love, the one written in starlight, and sealed with tragedy, was still waiting. Broadway. Anna Christie. 2 actors on stage, pretending to fall in love. Except they weren't pretending. Natasha Richardson, 30 years old, daughter of theatrical royalty, moved through the world with grace that seemed choreographed by fate itself. In rehearsals they barely spoke, but the silences between their lines became their real conversation. Opening night, the audience believed they were watching fiction. They were witnessing prophecy. When the curtain fell, she turned to him, nervous laughter spilling from her lips. "Thank you for tonight," he whispered. That single sentence carried 15 years of future joy and unbearable grief. They married in 1994, in Millbrook, New York. Candlelight, instead of cameras. Rain tapping softly on windows like a warning nobody heard. "For the first time in my life," he told a friend, "I can breathe." 2 sons arrived, Mahil, then Daniel. The house filled with wooden swings that hung crooked and laughter that straightened everything else. 15 years of ordinary miracles. Birthday cakes that listed sideways. Scripts read by firelight. Winters where snow piled against the porch, like accumulated happiness. "She was my compass," he said once. "My home, my silence, my peace." Those who knew him saw the transformation. The haunted edges softened. The guard lowered. The man who'd spent decades preparing for disaster finally learned to exhale. Every night, he'd lie awake listening to her breathe beside him, thinking, "So this is what peace sounds like." But peace is always temporary, isn't it? And happiness, when it finally arrives, is just tragedy waiting to reveal itself. It began as the kind of day you'd frame in memory. Bright sun on fresh snow, laughter echoing across ski slopes near Montreal. Natasha was taking a beginner's lesson. No danger, no warning. Then a fall, simple, almost comical. She laughed it off, joked with instructors, went back to the lodge. But inside her skull, something had broken. A tiny tear in a blood vessel, invisible and patient. Hours passed. A headache arrived, and refused to leave. Liam was in Toronto, filming. The phone call came like a fist through glass. One word shattered his entire existence. Accident. He boarded the first flight north. Later he'd remember gripping his wedding ring so tightly it left indentations that lasted for days. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and endings. Machines beeped rhythms that sounded like countdown timers. A doctor approached, eyes already apologizing for what his mouth had to say. "Her brain is dead. Words that don't make sense, even as you hear them." He walked into her room expecting life, breath, movement, recognition, anything human. But Natasha lay motionless, skin still warm, face serene, as if sleeping through a nightmare she'd wake from any moment. For one cruel, merciful second, he could almost believe it. He took her hand, still soft, still hers, and whispered, "Sweetie, you're not coming back from this." There was no script for this, no director to yell cut, no second take where everything turns out differently. Just a man who'd played heroes for decades, now powerless in the role that mattered most. For hours he sat beside her, speaking softly, anchoring her soul with his voice. "You're safe. You're loved. You can go." They'd made a promise years earlier, the kind couples make thinking they'll never have to keep it. "If one of us can't return, the other will let them go." He nodded to the doctors. The machine stopped.